Moving on now, Congress finally has a deal, ending the shutdown, raising the debt ceiling. But what impact will the fighting have on politicians keeping their seats next year, especially here in Michigan? Obviously, we've talked about how this is how politics works. Things get done. There's a little trouble here, a little trouble there. All's well that ends well. But some polls that have been out have shown the American people are fed up with this and that they want to kick out who is in Congress. Now, whether that actually happens next year,
well,
that's a question.
Now for 3 election cycles. And, you know, I would caution that it's a year out. And a lot of events can influence the election over the next year. This wasn't the first showdown they've had. It won't be the last. And one of the problems is they're all thinking too much about the next election instead of thinking about the actual problem. We've now got the government back up and running again. We've got another temporary deal. But once again, we've done nothing to address the core issue here. And that core issue is that we're lurching from crisis to crisis without a budget. We haven't had an annual budget in 5 years. That's unacceptable. And they can't let the next deadline come and go without putting a budget in place.
Yeah, so we could see this in another 3 months or so. Stephen, is there anyone who could be in trouble in Michigan in terms of a congressional delegation?
Well, I mean, again, I think, you know, part of the problem is that the news cycle moves so fast now, and it moves from this to that to this to that.
Well, we have a short attention span.
Well,
Squirrel.
yeah,
We're looking over there. Where are we going next?
People who are mad this week about Congress in 2 months will be mad about something else or paying attention to something else.
Do you really think so, or did this impact people so much, more than you think, and that people are maybe fed up for the last time that this is?
I don't know. I mean,
look at the polls. Steve Mitchell did a poll this week in Michigan. Were you affected by the shutdown? 80% said no. I mean, I think they're frustrated by the silliness and by the spectacle, but unless your life was impacted some way, you're not, that
and that's unfortunate because, of course, this cost us $24 billion. And you had 800,000 people out of work for 3 weeks.
These guys fritter away $24 billion over lunch.
But, you know, you're the one complaining about that.
I know, but I'm talking about the impact on the American people.
It's an impact.
It's
nothing.
It's going to catch their mind here, what's going to influence the next election, in my mind, is this Obamacare disaster. We still...
You guys have been saying that for 6 years.
And now it's
You've lost every election that's come up.
Now it's unfolding. People can't sign on to the exchanges still.
Medicare Part D was the same way.
No, it wasn't.
Sure
They
it was.
can't sign on to the exchanges still. You were at risk of a lot of people on January 1st not having been dumped on the exchanges they can't sign on to. I've been getting furious letters all week from these people who've been told their private insurance is going to double and triple. 150,000 people last week. Obamacare is going to be the issue next year.
All right. Well, we'll take a look at that. I mean, that's a different.
Republicans have been threatening
topic.
You know,
write that down. Well, it was in 2010.
We should roll the tape from last year after the Supreme Court upheld Obamacare, and Nolan sat here and said this will be the issue in November.
Because the impact hadn't touched people, but it certainly was the issue in 2010 when Democrats got routed.
All right, let's jump.
And it could be again in 2014.
Well,
let's jump from Obamacare real quick and to the general silliness. And you said, you know what, this is silliness, and whether people were impacted by the shutdown or not, that may not influence their vote. I would argue, or can you make the argument that people should be annoyed by the silliness?
People should be annoyed by the
annoyed
overall
enough to make
silliness.
a change.
They should be annoyed that you know, the grown-ups are not sufficiently in charge. Here you have a great example of the grown-ups sort of taking charge and saying, here's how we solve this, right? You had Republicans and Democrats in the Senate, 14 of them, sit down and hammer out a deal. But of course, it's a short-term deal, and it's not dealing with these larger issues. We have a fundamental disagreement in this country about several things that we got to work out.
Oh, but Ron Fournier in the National Journal this morning wrote an excellent piece, an excellent analysis. I'd urge everyone to look that up. I mean, and he posed the question, what will the president do now? The president scored a political victory. Will he keep focused on politics and campaigning, or will he now lead? And there's an opportunity here to say, okay, we're through this. We negotiated this deal. Let's sit down and negotiate a broader deal that trades some of what I want for some of what you want.
I actually think
after 5 years, get a budget in place. Because ultimately, dysfunction in an organization at this level will land at the feet of the CEO.
I actually think the smarter route would be to keep the president somewhat out of this. This gang of 14 in the Senate didn't have the president much involved in that. I think there's an opportunity for some leadership there on their part. It depoliticizes it by leaving the president, who some people just see red every time they think about him. You leave him out of it, and you get some of this stuff worked out.
All right, we'll
Leave
see.
him out of it. Democrats in the Senate aren't going to do anything without his sign.
Well, but they just did.
All right, well, moving on, the Supreme Court listened to arguments this week on Michigan's ban on affirmative action. All right, so Stephen, let me ask you, as our resident Supreme Court expert.
And U of M graduate.
And U of M graduate. How is it shaping up in the court, do you think, looking at this decision?
I don't think there's any question the court will uphold Michigan's right to do what it did and say, we don't want to have race-conscious policies in admissions. I think that's bad policy, and I disagree with it. But I don't think there's anything unconstitutional about it, and I think the plaintiffs here, or the respondents in this case, are putting their hopes on Anthony Kennedy wrongly. Justice Kennedy is a swing vote, but he sees affirmative action. If you go back and read his former opinions, he sees affirmative action as a form of discrimination, not anti-discrimination. So you've got a real mismatch there.
And I don't think the core issue is whether affirmative action is good or bad. It's the people's right to make this kind of policy. And I think the court will uphold that. And the question becomes, what do institutions like the University of Michigan do to accomplish the goals without having the affirmative action
of getting a more
policies in
diverse
place?
student body.
And other states have dealt with this. Other universities have dealt with this, and they've done things that the U of M haven't done. And I think they're going to have to look at other solutions to this.
What solutions are you talking about?
Well,
Nolan?
other states have, for example, ended legacy enrollments for their graduates, so that if you went to U of M, your kid gets an edge in getting in the door. Other states have done affirmative action based on economics rather than race, which is perfectly acceptable under this past Supreme Court rulings. Other states like Texas have taken the top graduates from every high school and let them in. Some combination of that, or one choice, would help U of M better diversify its campus.
Well, you could try some of those, and some of them are better than others. Some of them produce better results than others. The 10% plans, I think, are absurd because they fly in the face of the kind of individualized consideration the court said you should be giving to every student anyway. But I also want to make it clear that I think it's absurd that we want to have this argument about eliminating racial considerations just in higher ed and pretend that there's color blindness everywhere else, and so that it belongs there. Of course, this is not a colorblind society. There's a lot of things that happen still because of the legacy of the awful racial discrimination that used to be part of the law and the Constitution in this country. We got to deal with that, I think, in a much more honest way than saying, well, let's just have race-neutral policies only at the point where we're talking about who gets opportunity and who doesn't.
But other states that don't have the affirmative action policies, who put bans in place, have managed to get around it with a combination of measures and maintain the sort of percentage they want. U of M
Some
hasn't.
of them have, yeah.
Now, one of the things at work here that they have to examine is the increasing number of out-of-state students at Michigan and Michigan State.
Sure.
We're now pushing close to 50% to get that higher tuition and more revenue in.
Yeah.
Those tend not to be minority students.
Yeah.
And I think that's another area they need to look at.
All right. And